We are so glad to have Kevin here and to get to hear a little bit more about his story and what God's laid on his heart. So please join me in welcoming Kevin Sparks.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so I know most of you guys. I don't know if I'd call that a friendly audience or not. But I am Kevin Sparks, for those of you who don't know me. I am a Marketplace Midland board member and president of Discovery Operating. But recently, I've been elected to the Texas State Senate. And what's crazy is that this time last year, I'd never even contemplated doing that. I mean, who would want to go do that, right? Apparently, it's a big deal. I was just in Austin yesterday, and I have never been so good looking, so smart, so funny. I'm telling you, if I had time to go play golf, they'd probably even compliment my golf game. And you guys that have seen me swing, there's nothing to compliment about my golf game. But it's really interesting because you get in those circles, and I'm the new guy, and I don't have an opponent in November, so it's just a matter of time. I get one vote in November, and I'm in. And so, don't know that I can always count on Jill. Sometimes it depends on the day, but my mom, I'm certain, is going to vote for me. But it's really interesting the way people in that business, and when I say business, it's the business of government and everything that goes along with that, lobbyists and all the folks that are trying to persuade, kind of see our representatives. I've known about some of that stuff, but I'm sure I've got plenty to learn. So how did I get here? So the short story is, I was approached last summer by a few folks. I kind of laugh a little bit. Used to call them my friends, who approached me last summer and said, "Would you consider running for this spot?" Some of those guys are actually in this group. But really, as Jill, and this is my wife, Jill, for those, raise your hand, Jill. For those of you who don't know Jilly, we started contemplating and kind of praying through it, and the long and short of it is we couldn't come up with a good enough reason to say no, or not to say yes. If good people don't step up when called, then what's left. And so we made the decision to answer the call, and immediately, I start getting calls from media, asking me questions, all kinds of questions. Hey, can we come interview you? What are your thoughts on this and that? And I felt initially I felt a little bit like Forrest Gump. If you guys remember the scene in the movie when he's just been discharged from the Army. He's still in his uniform, and he kind of gets pushed into a line, and the next thing you know, he's standing up on a stage in front of hundreds of thousands of war protesters, and the guy says, "Hey, tell us about Vietnam." And that's kind of what I felt like. I've never dealt with the media before. I'm getting phone calls. People are saying, "Hey, can you come speak at our whatever?" And really, really interesting and challenging at the same time. So that's kind of the short version of what happened. But today I kind of like to take you through a longer version, because as we, and Jill's right in this whole thing, this mess with me, as we got further into the campaign, I began to understand that all of this didn't just start last summer. that a lot of this had been orchestrated over a long period of time. During different parts of the campaign, people had asked me if I was nervous. And realistically, I never got nervous, which is a little uncharacteristic for me. Because if I didn't win, the good news is, hey, I'd raised my hand. As long as I did everything I could do, I could hold my head up and go back to doing what I love doing, which is doing oil and gas stuff with my family and my coworkers. We have several of those in the back of the room who are nice enough to show up today. And, they're like family, right? So I go back to doing business with my family. And so how could I lose? And I learned a little bit about that, I think, growing up playing athletics. I was a good athlete, but I wasn't a great athlete. But I was fiercely competitive. And so, I had to learn how to be okay with the results. And I didn't actually learn that till well into my adult years. As some of you guys may remember, I got at one point in time, I was playing in men's church basketball. And at that time, they had a rule: if you got a technical and you were thrown out of the game and get reinstated, you had to go by and see your pastor. And I found myself in that position. And those of you guys who know Patrick Payton, who is fiercely competitive, myself and another co-member of this church found ourselves in Patrick's office. And when we walked in, he just rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, come on, guys." But I have gotten better over the years, understanding that it's not just about winning. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4:12 and 13 says, "In this way I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." When I finally, and of course I'd heard that a long time, but when I finally understood and embraced that concept, it's a game changer. I learned, and I am reminded often, that I'm only responsible for my attitude and my effort. It's God that's responsible for the outcome. And I have very little to do with the outcome, no matter how hard I try. It's very freeing. If I've got a well that, we've got problems on, and we're overseeing it and doing everything we can to manage that situation as best we can, we can't see down 2 miles. And that winds up going south. I'm not responsible for that result. All I can do is the best that I can do with the tools that God has given me. If I'm in a serious discussion and that discussion doesn't go well, as long as my heart is in the right place and, I have prepared and done the best I can, I'm not responsible for those results. If I run a race and I don't wind up coming out on top, I've done what I was called to do. So this attitude of winning at all cost that has gripped our nation, I think is really tearing us apart. And this is a little bit of the political part of my discussion today. We see it in sports. We definitely see it in politics. We see it in relationships. I have family. We have family that after Trump was elected, from my vantage point, they just lost their mind. There have been other presidents that I wasn't too fond of their policies, but, we still got together for family reunions. Well, President Trump gets elected, and, man, you're off the Christmas card list if you voted for him. It's almost bizarre. We see it in business. When I first got into this industry, I would say that, most of the contracts that I looked over and signed were probably 3 to 5 pages, 7 maybe, was kind of a long agreement. My goodness, now, we don't sign a single contract that's not 35 or 40 pages, and a lot of them are 80 or 90. And if you get the attorneys involved, the sky's the limit, right? And I think that comes from this idea of winning at all cost means that we, and I use that term generically, will do whatever it takes. And so, therefore, when we go into negotiations, we don't trust anybody at the table because we're used to working now in a world of planning to do whatever it takes. Well, I don't want to burst the attorneys in the room, their bubble, but you can't draft up an agreement to cover everything that could possibly happen over the life of that agreement. It's just impossible. But I really do believe that this winning at all cost is something that our society, it's really tearing at the fabric of our society. Jesus said, when asked about what the greatest commandment was, Jesus said that it's to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And so there wasn't anything in there about winning at all cost. In fact, when Jesus is talking to his disciples, he says, the first will be last, and the last will be first. So it doesn't matter if you win an argument with your wife. If you're sleeping on the couch at the end of the day, you still lost, right? Dallas Willard, an American philosopher known for his writings on Christian spiritual formation, is quoted as saying, "It's not the accomplishments you achieve, it's the person you become." He wrote a lot about the slow, unglamorous building of character. So as we spent more time on the campaign trail, it forced me to really search my heart to define why and what I believed about all kinds of issues. The best question I was asked while I was on the campaign trail was actually from a high school student. We were up in Dalhart at meet and greet, and one of the teachers from text line, I think, brought the whole senior class, all 12 of them. And I was really appreciative that he did. And so I was taking questions from the audience. And, most people will ask, what are you passionate about? What issues are, you really going to try and make a difference on? And she asked, what makes you qualified for this job? All right. Wow. So I had to think about it a little bit. Well, we are expecting our legislators to go to Austin and to conduct the business of the state on our behalf. And so, I think 35 years in business, hopefully I've learned some things about that, and that hopefully qualifies me to go conduct business on y'all's behalf. The other part of that equation is, hopefully, I'm a person who has been engaged in that slow, what do you say, that slow, unglamorous building of character. There were other questions while we were, on the campaign trail. Jill got cornered one time. Jill got cornered one time, and this guy asked her if she was for the genital mutilation that is circumcision. Honestly, if he'd asked me that while I was on the stage, I might have laughed. So fortunately for me, not so much for Jill. She's engaged in this conversation about, mutilation. But she handled it well. I had a guy ask at a candidate forum if I'd put any thought into Texas setting up its own monetary system. And my initial thought was, oh, this guy's a quack. Fortunately, I didn't voice that. But as I thought about that a little bit, I'm thinking, we probably would benefit from some people much smarter than myself to at least put a little thought into that. If Washington, D.C. eventually melts down, might be helpful to at least have kind of run through a couple of mental exercises on what that might look like. So, all through the campaign trail, I was actually getting stretched in a lot of ways that I hadn't been previously. I mean, it really forced me to think deeply about why I believe what I believe. And as I search deep into what I believe, it really all comes from a biblical perspective for me. And it's that idea of serving God and serving man, not serving government. Our founding fathers believed that all of our rights were given to us by God, and that we have the ability and the right to self-govern. We don't really talk much about self-governing, unless, you're in one of those nerdy groups that focuses solely on everything political. And we've done our society a disfavor, I think, because we haven't talked much about that in training up our children in school, maybe even at home. My kids learn some of that just because they're a product of their home environment. But this idea of self-governing was really contemplated with a society where people were in the process of this slow, unglamorous building of character. And without that building of character, our society really struggles. So I looked back and kind of examined some of the things in my life. I came from a family of diligent, hardworking folks. My parents and my brothers, everybody surrounding the Spark side of the family, they just work hard. That's what they do best. And so, from the time I was old enough to, turn a screwdriver or hand a wrench, I was working, doing something productive. And really, there was this expectation of working in our house, which I think is a really healthy thing. Work's not a punishment. Work's an opportunity, right? It allows us to add value to our society. And as we add value, it helps our self-esteem. There's something about us. God created us to work, to do tasks. I later saw that work gave me an opportunity to serve. And that was kind of paradigm changing. That was a little bit of a shift for me in that, the better I worked, the more I could serve those who I worked with, whether it's my coworkers or my staff or my boss. But it also gave me the opportunity to serve around the community. The more I worked and was successful, gave me tools and opportunities to be blessings to others. And I told my kids, several of them are here today, you can work real hard and make a ton of money, and if you spend it all on yourself, you'll never have anything. So if your neighbor's house burns down, you might really want to go help them. But if you haven't saved anything, you have nothing to give them. And so, working hard gives us all kinds of opportunities to serve our fellow man. So, sports, Boy Scouts, school, that was another area as I was growing up that really helped me develop skills, and it helped me learn how to overcome challenges. In Boy Scouts, it was high adventure, and at the end of the day, you learned that, gosh, you can do so much more than you expected. Same thing with sports. You kind of get past that mental block of, I'm at the end of my rope, and running, they call it the wall, right? You hit the wall, but you find out, really, you can do a whole lot more than that. And that's really helpful in life. Later, coaching kids sports and doing things like, being in the leadership of Indian guides and Indian princesses, volunteering with Young Life, things like that forced me to really get out of my comfort zone. Serving on charitable boards like High Sky Children's Ranch, One Accord for Kids, later the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Those things help me understand that I have a role and an obligation in trying to help solve our cultural problems. Once again, it's that idea of loving our neighbor. So that part of the equation actually was the easier side for me because I'm a doer, But the other side, it's not what you achieve, but it's the person you become, was honestly the more challenging side for me. So, I started looking at my spiritual development and how that's kind of helped develop, mold, and shape me. I came to an understanding of Christ's sacrifice for me in the third grade, and understood that, without that sacrifice, I could never have a relationship with God. And but the church that I grew up in was very much, a lot of reverence for God, but not much discussion about a personal relationship with Christ as a Savior. So as a Young Life kid, which was kind of my next step, Young Life is a non-denominational Christian organization for high school kids. I went to Young Life camp the summer after my senior year in high school and was finally exposed to this idea of a personal relationship with Jesus. That was kind of a daily, ongoing something. It's so much a contrast to the church that I was raised in, which was not very evangelistic. Their idea of evangelism was, we're going to be here on Sunday morning, and we'll leave the door unlocked if you want to come join us. Not a bad church, but very inward focused. College, had a lot of trying times in college, and that forced me to really dig down into, what do I really believe about this relationship with God? And I was fortunate enough that a gentleman named Everett Sheffey, who I didn't know at the time, had been discipling freshman guys at UT for, at that time, probably more than 20 years. And through God orchestrated some crazy circumstances where I ran into him 5 different times all over Austin. And then ultimately, God provided time in my schedule to meet with him, and he kind of helped me through that rough part of college. Jill and I were fortunate enough to be part of the group that went with the church plant that First Baptist sent out in the early 2000s, which is now Stonegate Fellowship. And we've had the privilege of raising our children here, and I've had the real privilege of working alongside as an elder of some extremely godly men that have mentored me and helped me as a dad and as a husband and really just as a person. And then the opportunity to lead comm group for 20 years and to pour into younger folks. But, I find as I've gotten older that I'm missing out if I'm not learning from them as well. Micah 6:8 says, "And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." So that kind of begs the question, am I fair in my dealings with people? Do I show mercy to those who wrong me? Am I learning about humility? In helping with the personal, what am I becoming? I've had more than my fair share of mentors. A lot of these guys are in this room today. My family, my friends, people that I've worked with in business for years and years, people I've worked with in ministry, coaches, teachers, bosses, co-workers. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I've been extremely blessed from that standpoint. I've gotten way more than my fair share, so if you guys are feeling like you've, been a little light on the mentors, it's because I've been hogging them. And I continue to learn about relationships through my kids. So most of you guys have kids, and you've realized that it's very much on-the-job training. You can't read enough books, you can't listen to enough podcasts because each one of them's different. They're all unique. It's both challenging and rewarding. It's gratifying and oftentimes humbling. I would say that Proverbs is a great resource for raising kids. If you haven't read through Proverbs lately, take the time the next month to read a proverb a day. Lot of great stuff. But the person who has shown me more about the value of relationships is my wife. Jill loves people, and she loves people well. And in turn, everybody loves Jilly. That's that whole, I'm more of a doer, and she's a beer. She's she can't not answer the phone when it rings. Literally. It doesn't matter what you're in the middle of. If her phone rings, she's going to answer it. I have developed the discipline of if I'm in the middle of something, I let it go to voicemail, and I'm thankful for that. But Jill loves people, deeply. When we were on the campaign trail, we're going to all of these small communities. So our district is 45 counties now. Goes all the way from El Dorado, Texas, up to the top of the Texas Panhandle with Lubbock carved out in the middle. Tons of rural Texas. And we'd pull into these little towns, and everybody loved Jill. They kind of tolerated me because I'm the guy running, but they loved Jill for obvious reasons. But, over our marriage, I have, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning on all this, but still learning that, there are things that are more important than finishing the task. I've always got a project going on. That's just how I work, and my kids are all nodding in agreement. So at one point, when my kids were younger, I decided that I was going to build a barn. You know, I love working with my hands. I love working with wood and iron, and I decided that it would be a healthy task if all of my kids had to help with that. So I ordered some plans and then ordered all the material. I mean, it came on a semi-truck of stuff. It's a 24 by 36 foot barn that's 25 feet tall. It created all kinds of challenges. The instructions that I had were very rudimentary. I mean, they were bare bones, which created lots of opportunities to, work through the challenges of figuring stuff out. And I thought that, number one, I like that kind of stuff, and I thought it'd be good for my kids. You'll have to talk to them afterwards whether that was a good thing or not. But one of the things that I learned through that experience is I had to go against my natural inclination to get out there every weekend to finish it up. And it ultimately became kind of the family joke that the building of the barn went on for literally years. Because when you have 4 kids, there's always something that needs to happen, whether it's a ball game or a birthday party or you finally get everything lined up to make a lot of progress, and, bad weather hits, and you go, well, we're not going to stand out there in 25-degree weather and just brave it. There are times in the oil patch where you have to do that, but building a barn with your kids is just not one of those times. And it was really hard for me, but God was really showing me that there are more important things in life than finishing that next task. God was so sweet. I told you early on that, this has been a process, and I was convinced that that God, even though I had known that I was going to take office, God knew that years ago. He knew that before I was born. I was up in Amarillo. We were up in Amarillo, and I'm being introduced to this crusty old guy who I already know contributed in a big way to my opponent in Amarillo. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our situation, our district has a very strong north and south component to it, with Lubbock carved out of the middle. And so the state senator for our district has always been from Amarillo, as long as I can remember. And so there were a lot of people up in Amarillo that were having heartburn with just the fact, no matter what they thought or didn't even know me, the idea that their senator would be from Midland gave a lot of people heartburn. So I'm trying to bridge that gap every chance I get up in the Panhandle. And so I'm being introduced to this old crusty guy on a Saturday morning, and he's got a big old cigar sitting on his conference room table, and my folks went with me when we went to the Panhandle because they were originally from the Panhandle, and it was really a sweet time to spend with my folks as we made tours up there, and of course all the people up there loved them as well. But I'm introducing kind of everybody in the room, and I'm telling this guy, hey, my parents both graduated from high school. My dad from Amarillo High. My mom was from the first class of Tascosa. He looks at my mom and he goes, what was your maiden name? And she said, Combs. He said, I knew it. I had a crush on you as a sophomore, and you wouldn't give me the time of day. And I'm thinking, oh, crud. Come on, Mom. Help me out here. But literally, they spent the next 10 minutes, all three of them, Mom, Dad, and this guy, talking about classmates and, reconnecting and times from their childhood. And I'm sitting there thinking, I serve an awesome God. To orchestrate that, I was in Spearman, which is where my grandfather's side of the family was from. And one of the things that I loved as a kid, my Aunt Mary, who never married, had a little general store right across from the school. And every time we'd go up there, she'd hand us a little paper bag, and we'd get to go pick candy from the candy store. And it was one of my great childhood memories. And I'm telling that story. Once again, I'm in Spearman at a political forum, and I'm trying to, all these people are staring at me. You know, you're the guy from the South. Why should we vote for you? And I'm trying to help them understand that I'm gonna take care of their needs just like I will the oil and gas people down here. And I tell that story about Aunt Mary's store, and afterwards, I had a whole host of people come up and share stories about their experience at Aunt Mary's store. And once again, I'm going, you know, God orchestrated that. We were struggling, Discovery operating in the early 90s. You older guys know how long the depression of 86 hung around out here. Early 90s, we don't have enough money to go drill any wells. Nobody was drilling. So we picked up some wells up in the Panhandle, some old junky wells from Texaco. And those wound up being my wells, my area of responsibility. So I spent quite a bit of time up there. And lo and behold, there's still a lot of those folks still up there. You know, once again, those connections, I wasn't running for office. I was just up there because we needed stuff to do. You know, it's kind of funny. Our very first Marketplace Midland speaker was Tim Dunn. I don't know, how long ago has that been? 8 years? 7 or 8 years? And he talked about the here-there path. And, you know, boy, you could see all the young guys in the room. They're paying attention. Of course, Tim's been very successful in the oil and gas business, and he's really imparting a lot of good, deep thinking. Well, I can tell you, running for office never showed up on my map, much less my here-there. But here's where I find myself. And, 7 or 8 months into this process, I'm firmly convinced that this is what God's called me to do next. And I am honored to have the opportunity to go do that. I'll close with this. Henry David Thoreau, well, not quite this, a couple more. Henry David Thoreau is quoted as saying, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. I mean, what a haunting thought. Why do you think that is? I think a lot of those men are men who haven't completely embraced that it's God's show, and that we're called only to do our part in his show and leave the results to him. Proverbs 8:35 says, "For he who finds wisdom finds life and obtains favor from the Lord." Are we working to find wisdom? Is that our goal? Is that what we seek? A.W. Tozer said, "Human nature, as we know it, is in a formative state. It is being changed into the image of what we love." What are you being changed into? Are you being changed into the image of Christ because that's what you deeply love? Are you being changed into something else? You've been changed into being a great engineer or a great salesman or, the greatest version of yourself. 1 Peter 4:10 tells us that each of us has gifts to be used to serve others so that God will be praised. I'm headed to Austin to serve in the Texas State Senate. But I hope and really even expect that my task there is going to be more spiritual in nature. And those of you who are willing to pray for me and Jill, I'd encourage you to pray for that. Because I really think our battle as a country is a spiritual battle first before it's political or anything else, or class warfare, or it's a spiritual battle. And I'm hoping that God has opened all of these doors to give me an opportunity to go make a difference in that battle, as we try and take care of, making sure that Texas stays on a sustainable path. So my question for you, and these are a couple of the table questions for today, and we'll take time to discuss, and then I'll come back up and answer a few questions, is what does success look like for you? When you think of that here, there path, what does success ultimately look like for you? Because you can be successful, but if your goal is in the wrong place, where does that leave you? Are you intently searching for wisdom? Are you on that slow, unglamorous path of building character? Those whose joy is in the Lord find favor with him. Discuss.